Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Oil Change Place Refuses to Pay for Damages. In 1993 I bought a 1992 Saturn, nice car, low mileage, ran great. I had been taking my cars to the same place for a few years for oil changes. Place was named after a certain Looney Tunes character that went beep beep and even used that purple-headed bird in their logo. One day in 1995 I had to run an errand across town right after the oil change. Sometimes there might be some smoke from oil getting on the exhaust headers, so I didn't think much of it when I saw a bit right after starting my car. I got on the highway and after several miles noticed smoke was coming out from under the hood. I pulled over and popped the hood to find the oil filler cap sitting in the valley of the valve cover instead of screwed down over the filler opening. Oil was everywhere, engine bay was soaked. I checked the oil and was 2 quarts low. I walked to a gas station, got oil and topped it off and turned to head right back to the oil change place. I didn't make it. The check engine light came on. The car started stumbling and running rough, and I managed to make it to the Oldsmobile dealer, thinking GM product I had done business with before. They took the car in while I called to cancel my appointment and called the oil change place to lodge a complaint. They told me they couldn't do anything, I had to call the boss. I got his number and called. This is where it starts getting fun. He basically told me it was my problem, he changes 90 cars a day and can't be expected to get everyone right. I told him he would be responsible for the damage to my car and he would be hearing back from me. Old's dealer told me the alternator was saturated in oil, being right behind the oil fill hole, and was shot. They had to go to the Saturn dealer for the alternator as it was not a standard GM part. Next day I get my car back, $450 to fix, needed a battery too. I call the oil change owner and he tells me to send him the receipts. I figure good, gonna get this taken care of in no time. Nope, I call a week later and he says with my car having 52,000 miles on it, he can't be sure it was the oil change that caused it. He even refused a refund on the oil change. I went back and forth with him for 3 months. He would flip-flop between being cooperative and combative, but never getting anything done. Finally I decided to sue. I filed and his response to the notification was that he wasn't responsible if his employees messed up someone's car. Since I am not familiar with this process, I asked the court clerk what to expect, and she became a library of info. I followed her advice, brought a ton of paperwork, showed up in a suit and tie to court, and explained my case to the judge. The oil change guy showed up in a pair of jeans that should have been thrown in the trash, complained that he was a small business owner and shouldn't be held accountable for his employees' actions. Suffice to say, judge ruled in my favor. I asked the court clerk what to do next and her reply was to lay low and do nothing. He had 30 days to appeal, and if I did nothing, he would think I was happy and wouldn't appeal. A month later she confirmed that he did not appeal. I then sent him a registered letter stating that he owed me the $450 plus $75 for court filing fee. My letter was carefully worded and stated that if he didn't pay I would file lien on his business. He called the day the letter was received and told me a check would be in the mail as soon as possible. It did take another month for the check to come in, but I did get paid. As I mentioned, it took 3 months for me to get tired of his crap, so I decided to check on whether he had legal right to use the beep beep bird material. Note this was before internet days. I made several calls and finally got a hold of W. Bros. Legal Department in Burbank, California. The lawyer I talked with was very interested in what I had for her and gave me her mailing address to send the information on the oil change place. A short time later a friend who knew of my troubles told me I needed to drive by the place, so I did. Less than 2 weeks after I sent the materials, including a copy of my receipt, the Yellow Pages ad, his business card, and photos of the place, the signage was covered with a sheet, no beep beep bird related stuff in sight. A week later the place had a new name and new logo. Now if this guy had just paid for his mistake up front, it would have been simple and done. As he chose to be a jerk, it wound up costing him a lot more. The next one is titled, Mess with Minors and My Job. Lose your job and your boyfriend. Alright, circa 2014 I worked for a large movie theater chain in a small Midwestern city. Job was pretty awesome outside of the crap pay and essentially no way to move up. I like to think I am good at my job and I try my hardest no matter where I work. In this particular situation I was one of the most tenured employees at the theater save for two other folks who had worked there part-time on the side and had full-time jobs elsewhere. So for the sake of this story I need to tell you about Jane, not actual name. Jane started working for the theater 2 months before me. They worked elsewhere as a supervisor and was looking to move up at the theater. Right after I started, one of the managers left to work at a different theater and the supervisor moved up. We had two managers, one general manager, basically the highest level at the theater, and a supervisor, which is a manager in training. This is important. Jane somehow got the supervisor position even though there was another person who essentially was promised the position due to their continued service at the theater for almost 8 years. There were rumors about Jane sleeping with the GM when she started, and this situation got them going again. I didn't care too much because why would I am but a lowly peon in the corporate machine. Anyways, Jane moved up and the tenured crew member left the company because they got screwed over. Once Jane moved up, we had a whole meeting about her moving up and how the theater focuses on professionalism and ensuring no favoritism was happening. Specifically referencing how normal crew members shouldn't fraternize outside of work with management. Jane didn't really listen to that though. She continued to hang out with the crew members who were mostly underage and would do various things like go drinking with minors, taking them to bars and buying them drinks, or simply buying alcohol at a store and letting them drink at her house. I honestly have no issue with the drinking at home deal, just adding context, as well smoke weed with them and post pictures on Instagram. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Jane had a secret Instagram where they would post pictures of themselves with their friends from the theater. They chose Instagram because none of their family or their boyfriend used Instagram and no one would know, right? Even more damning was her relationship with a 19-year-old that worked at the theater. She had a boyfriend who had been with her for years and honestly supported her for all intents and purposes. Not only did she have a 19-year-old side piece, but also was messing around with a 17-year-old. I even caught them messing around in the break room one time. She essentially threatened me with my job if I told anyone. Honestly, she could have just told me to please be quiet and I would have just judged her silently. Fast forward about a year or so and another one of the managers left for a new job. Jane obviously moved up and someone else took the supervisor position. Now I won't go into too much detail, but despite my tenure and performance I was looked over for the promotion. A newer crew member who was really good friends with Jane got the position over me. This was confirmed by the other manager who let me know that Jane was definitely in good with the GM, who ultimately made the final decision. That being said, I was beginning to sour and making minimum wage for years at a job that couldn't give a shit about my efforts and continued performance. That being said, I was preparing for an exit. Before I get into my exit, it is important to note that Jane had and most likely still has a problem with me. I have talked about some issues I had with her, but I never escalated or even confronted her about anything she did to me up to this point. I honestly left it be. But I didn't like her, and the fact I didn't like her or play along with her bullshit infuriated her. So much to the point where she made my life hell at the theater. When she was a supervisor, she didn't have much power, but when she became manager, she began giving me shit shifts, convincing people that I was weird and to avoid me. I mean, I am weird, but not like avoid me weird. Threatening me physically, threatening my job. Her and her gang of misfit a-holes also slashed my tires. I have no solid proof, but my car was parked in the employee lot and you know only employees can get in. Beyond that, she also made fun of my girlfriend, my now wife, for having an invisible illness, MS. She would make her life hell because she had a disability and had some minor limitations. Add together all of this, plus my girlfriend went off to college, plus getting looked over for the promotion. Suffice it to say, I found a new job. I had a few close friends at the theater, including my now wife, who I met while working there. Silver lining, right? I had let a few of them know about the new job, but told them to keep it on the DL since it was still 2 weeks away. I had put my 2 weeks in with the GM and asked that he also keep it on the DL since Jane and her posse would duck with me. I told him that I wanted to tell everyone myself, so it kept him quiet. Now the important thing about my new job is that it essentially paid me double my wages from the theater. All of my friends were stoked for me. I was taking a job that would also have me making more than the managers at the theater, but also a job that put me on a better track in life. That being said, with Jane and I butting heads on multiple occasions and her track record of messing with me, she decided to get one last attack on me. She started a rumor that I was just going to call out on all of my shifts the 2 weeks before my new job started. With her last act of revenge in motion, the GM approached me and let me know that he wouldn't be scheduling me the last 2 weeks. I tried to explain to him that the rumors were bullshit, that I needed to work because it would be my only source of income. I told him that Jane started the rumor, and I started to tell him all of the other stuff as well. He of course didn't believe me and told me that Jane wouldn't do what I was saying she would do. So it was her word versus mine. I contacted my new job, who let me know that my start date was firm and that their budget wouldn't allow me to start until 2 weeks later as originally planned. Now here I am essentially jobless for 2 weeks. Now I was upset, but I was also lucky. I was still living with family and didn't have to pay rent, so I sucked it up and essentially told myself that I would just take a forced 2-week vacation. But Jane didn't stop there. She escalated again by having one of her cronies call my new job and tell them that I got fired. I was luckily able to talk down my new boss by letting him know that this wasn't the case, that I put my 2 weeks in and everything else, but that was the last straw. I left my last day at the theater, and while it was sad and I was upset that I wouldn't be able to work out the last 2 weeks of my job that I had for years, I was focused and determined on revenge. Rule number 1 of living a secret life and having a secret Instagram is not add everybody and their mother to the page. I had a friend of a friend who also didn't care for Jane. Let's call them Joe. Joe and I had gone to high school together and briefly worked at the theater together. He and Jane were part of the same group at the theater until they had a small falling out. Nothing crazy, but he wasn't exactly happy with her. I talked to Joe and we discussed my issues with Jane over some lunch that I bought for him. Food is the key to all revenge plots. Once we ate and discussed my problems with Jane, I asked for his help. I needed access to her Instagram. You know, the secret one, showing her hanging out with underage employees, drinking alcohol and smoking weed with them, and also some mushy posts about her 19-year-old boyfriend, as well as some moderately racy photos with her 17-year-old fling. With very little discussion, he gave me full access. I took screenshots of essentially everything. We are talking 2 to 3 years worth of illicit and moderately illegal activity. More than enough to get her fired and to raise some questions in her relationship. I took the screenshots and I printed them on the most high-quality paper material that CVS had to offer. I also copied them to a few flash drives for good measure. I purchased 2 yellow padded envelopes, can never be too safe, and I filled them both with copies of all of the posts as well as a flash drive with additional copies. As well, I included a note in each one for the appropriate parties. One of the envelopes was taped to the back door of the theater. There was somewhat of a blind spot, so pulled into the parking lot from the rear and snuck around the corner Mission Impossible style to tape the envelope to the back door. On it was the GM's name. As well, in the letter I merely stated that one of their managers had a secret Instagram with a lot of damning evidence of not only favoritism, but also fraternizing with underage employees amongst other wrongdoings. In the letter I also requested her immediate termination, or the information would be provided to the district manager as well as our corporate office. I made sure to put it somewhere the GM would see on his morning sweep when he opened the theater. The second folder and letter was delivered to her home by Joe. Joe agreed to this as I knew Jane's schedule and had a good idea of when she would be gone, and he knew where she lived from previous hangouts. With both folders delivered, it was only a matter of time. Before I knew it, I was receiving death threats from Jane's gang. All of them saying that they knew it was me and that Jane was going to come after me, that she never did anything to deserve this. It didn't matter to me, of course. I no longer worked there and would hopefully never have to deal with them again. From what I heard, she was taken into the main office of the theater and the GM let her have it. He ultimately had to fire her because there was very clear proof that she was in direct violation of many of the rules and conditions of her employment. As well, her boyfriend, with proof in hand, kicked her out of his home. Last I heard, she moved farther north and hasn't held down a solid job since. Her family didn't want much to do with her once everything came out with her cheating on her boyfriend. Also, the part about fooling around with a 17-year-old tends not to sit well. In the end, I started my new job without fail and moved on from that place. Haven't seen much of anyone from there since. The next one is titled, Lay off a third of the team and expect us to work harder. We will see about that. So this happened sometime in the 2010s somewhere in the UK, that's all I'm revealing. I worked for a medium-sized PLC, public limited company, in a small team that worked with the sales department getting quotes. I had previously worked in another team in a different department in the same company as well. So to set the scene, the company had recently had some issues with regulators and senior management were either oblivious to the damage they were doing or didn't care. They were trying to save costs but going about it all the wrong way. So my team consists of 6 team members and a manager. We were fairly busy and often helped out on other teams as well, and they would in turn help us. This is important for later. So we are all called into a meeting without warning and told that due to declining work tickets they were laying 2 of us off. They did say 2 people were safe, the manager and his sidekick. They made us reapply for our jobs, including doing a test following the letter of the law on redundancy, which had nothing to do with our roles. It also became apparent during the process that the company flat out lied or at the very minimum manipulated the data used to come up with their conclusion of falling ticket numbers. They dropped by 13 from year 1 to year 3. Bear in mind it was a total of several thousand tickets a year. In the end, the company carried on and 2 team members were removed and made redundant, one of whom took a golden handshake, the other sued the company for various things not really worthy of mention here, and won. After the dust settled, it also became apparent manager secured his sidekick's position despite him being the worst member of the team in terms of work done and work quality. So in the weeks after, the entire team were too busy to help other teams who then stopped helping us, so a huge backlog of tickets also built up. We also got threatened with disciplinary proceedings if our backlog didn't come down, but was also refused any overtime. During the process, we had also been admonished for skipping steps in getting quotes, steps that often took a significant amount of time and served no purpose. So me and 2 others remaining, not including sidekick who had his nose so far up manager's rear ended in came out of his mouth, decided to do everything by the book, down to every last bullet point. This made the backlog of work even worse, but they couldn't say anything. One week we had another meeting with HR, the sales director and our manager to discuss the issues. We all calmly said, we are sorry but we have to follow the guidelines and rules laid down and this is as fast as we can work. We were also asked to start helping out the other teams again as we should be team players. Again we said, we are sorry but we can't. Our workload is too high and it's also not in our contracts that we have to do other teams' work. This went on for several months and management still refused to believe we were overworked. When it was time for holidays, we realized they hadn't changed the amount of people allowed off from 3. So we all booked holidays, they both went abroad and I decided to visit family the other end of the UK. Of course, when manager realized, a week before, he went nuts and another meeting with HR was called. We all calmly said, sorry but we checked the rules for our team and 3 people out of 4, manager could do what he likes, can be off at any one time. And again stood our ground and all went on leave for 2 weeks each. This caused even more chaos at work, as you can imagine. The sales director after this hatched a plan to get the Indian teams, we had offices in India and other offshore places, to be trained up by us and to help us. However, they demanded we fly out to spend weeks there training them. Again we all refused as it's not in our contracts to be trainers or to have to work abroad. They ignored the fact I didn't have a passport at this point. So poor old manager and his sidekick traveled out and trained them for weeks. Eventually both stayed for over 2 months and failed to train them. We would send low effort tickets to them and they would screw it up and we simply said, sorry, to fix this we need to do it again. So after 6 months they gave that idea up entirely. After around a year or so of this, I'm being deliberately vague on timing so please don't ask about it, we all decided to all seek other employment, having found we all could not trust the company or manager anymore. And we all found roles elsewhere within a week of each other, so all handed our 4-week notices, again to the letter of our employment contracts, and were due to all leave on the same day. Now the female member of the team who was a very learned person, and she revealed in all our contracts any documentation we create is ours and we can do with it how we wish when we leave. So we hatch a plan. In the final week we are there, we move all our digital stuff to one location, including all my manuals and cheat sheets for my previous team. They both did the same with their previous positions within the company. On our final day we bring in our own external drives and with its help download and removed all documentation and deleted the copies on the company systems. We all said our goodbyes and at the end of the day quite happily told our manager what we had done. He exploded and demanded it back, and we calmly tell him not according to the letter of our contracts, this, waving the drives at him, is ours and we choose to remove it with us. We were later told by friends who remained that the sales director had a fit because now no one was doing quotes for him. Gladly we all have had great new places and keep in touch. The last one is titled, Boys Take All the Candy, Get Chased by Pennywise. As I'm sure you're all aware, last night was Halloween. Because of COVID, my neighborhood opted to leave out bowls of candy, rather than the traditional handing out candy face to face. Since there are a lot of kids in my neighborhood, I had 2 candy stations set up in my driveway, in case 2 groups of trick-or-treaters showed up at once. Now, I'm not so naive that I expected everyone to follow the "only take one" signs I taped to the bowls. Kids are kids, after all, but I still didn't expect the following to happen. One of the first group of trick-or-treaters to come to my house was a group of boys, maybe between 10 to 12 years old, all dressed as hot dogs. I giggled to myself as I watched them from the window, wondering how and why they all agreed to their costume choice. A few minutes later, I saw they were back again. Weird, I thought. After they were gone, I went outside to check the candy bowls, and they were both nearly empty. Keep in mind, I'd emptied a 100-piece bag into both bowls, and there were about 8 boys in the group. I went inside to get some backup candy, and complained to my mum and her boyfriend that the boys not only came back twice, but took almost all the candy. Now, something I should note about my mum's boyfriend is he's a big lover of Halloween, and showed up to our house in full costume. Not just your typical Party City costume, but a well-made, expensive Pennywise costume. He even had black makeup around his eyes, so they wouldn't be visible under his mask. Something else to note is he likes messing with people. A few minutes after I refilled the candy bowls, the hot dog boys were back. I sighed in exasperation, at which point my mum's boyfriend apparently got an idea. Standing behind the glass door, he stared directly at the group of boys. They noticed him very quickly, and while most of them just laughed in amusement, one decided he was a tough guy, egging him on with the whole "come at me, bro" body motion. My mum's boyfriend returned the gesture, creating more amused laughter from the boys. Tough guy did it a second time, and, without saying a word, my mum's boyfriend ran out the door towards the boys. He only ran to the edge of the lawn, but the hot dog boys still sprinted down the street, and I didn't see them again for the rest of the night. Hopefully they learn a little lesson about greed, and will have a funny story to tell later on. Thanks for listening.